welcome to the third and final part of my model build of the U.S.S. Missouri. This I started on January the 1st, 2022, and I finally finished it on March the 31st, 2022. It's taken me over 3 months, or almost 3 months, 3 months less a day, to actually build this model, because my own arrogance, and hands up, I plead guilty, it's my own arrogance made me believe I was better than I actually would. This is such a complicated model. It is unbelievable. Some of the parts are so small and so tiny, and I just don't have the dexterity in my hands to do them. I think you've got to have the dexterity of a Barbie doll. You've got to have hands the size of the Barbie doll to do things. I'm just all fingers and thumbs. In fact, at one stage, I walked away from this model for nearly 3 weeks because I didn't want to do it anymore. I was getting extremely frustrated with the amount of mistakes I made because of the number of small and fiddly bits. I've got to stress though, this isn't a fault of the model maker. This isn't a fault of the model kit. It does warn you about the parts on the box, and it does say it's difficulty level 6 out of 7. I chose to ignore that, and that's my own fault, and I paid the price for it. However, I finally got it finished. And you know what? After 3 months, I'm quite pleased with the results, and I get a great sense of satisfaction when I look at it. And all it took was that last week to build. I just needed to give myself that little push to get over my disappointment and get on with it, and I did. And all told, I thoroughly enjoyed the build. Anyway, let's get on with it. Because I didn't read the instructions properly, I assembled one of the guns incorrectly, or rather I did read the instructions, but I confused 2 pieces between the guns. I actually thought that all 3 pieces were identical, where I had to make 3 gun turrets, but they weren't. One was different from the other 2, and I didn't notice it until after the gun was made. The other thing that I've noticed is, and here's a little tip, you've got things that are right-handed and left-handed because you put things on the right and the left of the ship, or starboard, I guess you'd call it. And they look identical in the book, and they look identical on the sprue. But when you take them out and when you start to fold them, you suddenly realise that you folded one the wrong way. Now here's the tip. If you fold something the wrong way, do not try and do what I did and fold it back the other way, because it will break. What you do is, before you fold it back, is you get sellotape, and you put sellotape on the inside curve, which obviously, because it's folded wrong, is the outside curve, but you put it on the inside curve. Then you fold it back. It will probably still break, but the sellotape is already in place to hold it. Once you've folded it back properly, I use a tiny little bit of resin to just fix it in place, and that works. I also noticed that I'm coming to some of the bits that I made at the very beginning when I started making this model, that I thought, why am I making this bit here? It's not going to anything that I put aside. And I'm starting to look for those bits now. They're starting to come into fruition where I'm using those. Another thing that I notice is, as we're getting towards the end of the sprue, especially when I'm cutting out the larger pieces, inside the larger pieces, inside the void spaces where other bits of superstructure go, the sprue has got pieces in there. So what you've got to do is, when you cut out a large piece, you also got to cut out these smaller pieces and put them aside, because you will need them for later. Don't think they're rubbish, or don't think they're not important. They are. You will need them for later. You might notice I'm using a little tool that looks like a razor blade with a cover on one end of it. It's not actually a razor blade, but it's as thin as a razor blade. What that is because some of these bits that you're making are so tiny, less than a millimetre in size, they're very difficult to pick up off of the cutting mat. So I've got this little tool, and what you do is you'd actually put the little tool underneath it and use that to pick it up with. It's a scraper of some sort. You can use decorating scrapers. Before I got this little tool, and I got it in with a folding kit that I purchased, you can actually use decorating scrapers, the things that decorators use for putting putty and plaster in walls, very small ones. As long as it's thin and bendy, use it to get under the bit and pick it up. That's another little tip for you. That's a handy little tool to have. I really found making these gun turrets very frustrating. The gun barrels, there's 3 barrels to a turret. The gun barrels have less than a millimetre of space between them, and it was very difficult. You could get the first barrel on, but then the second barrel, because you were working so close to the first barrel, was a very tight fit and very, very fiddly, and the third barrel was just the same. And every time I put the third barrel on, I'd knock the second out of line, and then I'd put the second back in line and it would knock the first out of line. This process went on for quite a while. It took me several hours to do just a single gun turret, although you can't see it in this movie because I've sped it up, but it was very, very frustrating. Again, this was my fault because I don't have the dexterity and I do suffer from arthritis. A younger person would not have a problem with these, but if you've got arthritic hands like I have, it will be difficult and painful, and I had to keep stopping while I was doing it. But I got there in the end. I'm now cutting out one of the larger deck pieces. As I said earlier, be very careful because in the void spaces there are some important parts that you will need later on, and it was only by sheer luck that I checked the instructions and I noticed that I would need these parts. Otherwise I was going to throw them away, which would have been yet another mistake on my part. So all I can say is on all the void spaces on the sprues there are parts that you will need. Do not mistake them for waste flesh. When I started cutting out the larger deck sections and the side of the ship, I thought, finally, I've come to the end of all the small fiddly bits. No, I hadn't. There were even more small fiddly bits to come. I couldn't believe how many small fiddly bits there are in this kit, and still they come. It's now starting to get more recognisable as a boat, and I'm wondering, is this now the end of the small fiddly bits? Am I actually going to see something that looks like a ship appear before my eyes as I work on with this model? Here I am using the bits that came out of the void spaces that I warned you about earlier, plus some of the smaller parts that I made very early on in the kit that I couldn't work out what they were for. They were ready made and they were put in my little plastic container. I put them aside in the hope that eventually I'd be using them, and we've come to that point now where I'm using them just to finish off the deck fittings on the deck of this boat. Here is where I broke yet another bit, but remember what I said. I've learnt as I've gone along, and although you can't see me because it's been sped up, I actually put a bit of sellotape on the inside curve as it was to be, which effectively is the outside curve where I bent it the wrong way. I put the sellotape on the inside, I trimmed it the same, and then I bent the curve or bent the tab the correct way. As predicted, it did break, but the sellotape held it in place perfectly. And then I used a tiny bit of my resin to correct it. Now the resin is UV cured resin, so it's not like super glue. It doesn't stick everything to everything, so you can put it on and you can adjust it and you can move it about, and it's only when you hit it with the ultraviolet light does the resin set. So it's great for that, so you can get things and move them to the nth degree to get them into the final position before you start setting with the ultraviolet light. I'm now getting at the point where I can start to see it all really coming together. I'm putting the superstructure onto the deck, and I'm getting a good sense of satisfaction here because I'm finally seeing how all those little small fiddly bits that I really hated with all their twisting and their bending and how it hurt my wrists and my thumb to make them, I can see how it's all coming together now and how it's starting to look like a ship or a boat. I mean, I don't know which it is. I'm sure somebody will no doubt correct me. I'll call it a boat, but I'm sure somebody is going to correct me on that. But I can finally see the end result. I'm on the home straight now. I'm getting near the end and I'm starting to actually really enjoy myself and looking forward to finishing it. I'm breathing a great big sigh of relief. earlier on I said that I'd messed up making the 3 gun turrets. Well, 2 of them were identical and 1 of them was slightly different, and the mountings on the top for the 2 that were identical, and for the 3rd one it was slightly different. Well, what I'd managed to do is I've managed to make some sort of hybrid turret by using part of the 3rd turret on one of the other ones. It's worked fine for those 2, but when I came to put the 3rd turret on at this point, it didn't, the bit on the top, which is a gun, didn't actually fit. So the only answer was to trim the tabs off and then reach for the UV resin again and glue it on. This UV resin has been my saviour throughout the making of this kit. I know it says no glue required, but that assumes you don't make any mistakes, and I made lots and lots of them. And now we come to what I found to be one of the most challenging parts of this build, putting the holes on the side of the ship. I managed to get the first hole on, that was fine, that was no problem at all, and bend it to fit the contours of the ship. But for some reason I had major problems with the 2nd hole, and I can't work out what I did wrong. I've got a funny feeling that when I joined the 2 halves of the top deck together, I may not have joined them properly and left them a bit short on one side, although visibly looking at it, it didn't seem any different. But I did have terrible problems getting the 2nd side of the hole to marry up. I did it eventually, and while I was doing it I also had another problem, is that I kept lowering the model and banging the top of the model against my work mat, which actually bent some of the bits that I put on the top and even broke one loose. So I had to be very aware of that and be very careful, and I also had to reach for the glue again, which you can't see because I forgot to turn the camera on at this point, because I was saying some, well, I didn't forget to turn the camera on, I was saying some very nasty rude words and I didn't want to record them. But in the end I got there. Putting the keel on, which is the final part of the build, also gave me some problems. This is where the 2 sides of the holes wouldn't match up, and it wouldn't match up on the bottom, and I had to force it to get it to go, and I'm still looking at it, I still can't get the final 2 tabs in place, and I've no idea why I can't do it. I must have done something wrong at some point earlier, but I can't work out where. And again, I had the same problem. I kept banging the top of the model against the table and only realising I'd done it after I'd done it, which broke some more of the model, so I had to come back with yet more resin. But I've done it. I've finished. It's complete. Oh. Well, I've finally got it finished, and I must say that that has been the most frustrating, annoying, vexing, just downright aggravating model that I've ever built, and it's all my own fault. The kit is a very, very complex kit. It has some extremely tiny parts in it, so tiny that with my arthritic hands I can't get and bend them and twist them. It really hurt my hands to do it, and I made a lot of mistakes. Not only with the making of the model, but also with the making of this video I made a lot of mistakes. This has also been the most complicated video I've ever had to make, and I've learned from both. I've learned a lot from both, actually. So the next video I make, I'm going to change the camera angle to have a front view rather than a top and a rear view. I'm going to have a front view, and I'm going to build more metal models. In fact, more metal models. In fact, I already have some that I purchased. I have some Metal Earth kits. I have Iron Man. I have the Mandalorian. I also have some Piececool kits. I have some British warships. I have some Peter's Cathedral and Tower Bridge. So it's not as if I'm gonna walk away from these kits. I've enjoyed doing it. All in all, I've enjoyed doing it, but I've made sure that the kits that I've got aren't as complex as the ones that I've just done. And like I say, I have learned a lot from it. I've learned what mistakes I've made and how not to make them in the future. And yeah, even with everything and the amount of time it's taken me, it has been an enjoyable kit, and I've really enjoyed it. So that's the end of this model build. My next model, I think, is going to be a plastic kit, which I shall be starting in the next few days. So that's where my roots are. That's where I started 30 years ago. So let's see if I've actually let's see if I can mess this one up as much as I have messed the all metal kit up. Anyway, I'll leave you with some pictures of the model, and hopefully I'll see you for the next video. So bye for now.